Racist judge mocks black woman, defends white police in court. Just days later, she caused 4 people to lose their jobs. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows on polished wooden floors, light that seemed to expose not justice, but the illusion of it. At the bench sat Judge Allen, his silver hair perfectly combed, his face set like chiseled stone. His eyes swept across the room with the kind of confidence born from years of unchecked authority. His fingers tapped the gavel lightly, as if eager to deliver another effortless dismissal. Across from him stood officers Darius and Jacob, both white, both smug in their pressed uniforms, their hands resting casually near their holstered weapons. They already knew the verdict. They always did. On the other side sat Olwen, calm and silent in her navy blazer, her hair pulled back neatly, her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't said a word throughout the trial. Her public defender, a young man barely out of law school, had stumbled through arguments that no one in the courtroom seemed to care about. Judge Allen leaned forward. "Based on the evidence presented," he began, raising the gavel. But Olwen stood up. Her voice was steady, controlled, cutting through the still air like a blade. "Before you rule, Your Honor, I'd like to remind the court, I am a United States attorney." Gasps. The smug look on Jacob's face vanished. Darius visibly flinched. Even the young public defender turned to Olwen with his mouth agape. Judge Allen froze. His hand trembled slightly. He blinked as if reality had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. Olwen stepped forward and held up her badge, letting the golden emblem catch the light. Her voice remained composed but firm. "Please, I'd love to see you dismiss the case now." For the first time in years, the power that Judge Allen had wielded so freely began to slip from his grasp. But for Olwen, this moment wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. 3 weeks before that unforgettable day in court, Olwen was just another woman finishing a long day at the U.S. Attorney's office. She wasn't in a courtroom. She wasn't wearing a badge. She was simply a black woman in business slacks and a cream blouse, stopping at a quiet suburban cafe to grab a latte before heading home. She never saw the patrol car parked across the street. She didn't notice the officers watching her through tinted windows, Darius and Jacob. The moment she stepped outside with her coffee, a siren chirped sharply. Her heart sank. "Hey, you!" Darius called out, hand resting near his weapon. "What are you doing around here?" Olwen raised an eyebrow. "I just bought coffee. I'm heading home." Jacob stepped closer, scanning her from head to toe. "We got a report of suspicious activity. You match the description." She had heard those words before, too many times. They never meant justice. They meant profiling. "I work in the city," she said calmly. "I'm a federal employee." "Got any ID?" Jacob asked. Olwen slowly reached into her bag and handed over her license, careful not to make any sudden moves. Even though she had nothing to fear, experience had taught her fear anyway. Darius barely glanced at the ID. "What else you got in that bag?" "Just my wallet and my work badge," she answered. Jacob snorted. "Work badge? What are you, a janitor?" Olwen's grip on her purse tightened, but her face stayed neutral. "I'm a federal prosecutor," she said. They laughed. "Oh yeah? And I'm the President of the United States," Darius sneered. And just like that, things spiraled. "Hands on the hood, now." "For what?" she demanded. "Resisting investigation." They didn't care who she was. They didn't care what she said. She was black. That was enough. Cold handcuffs snapped around her wrists. Strangers walked by. Some slowed. Some stared. No one intervened. In the back seat of the cruiser, she caught eyes with a young black boy on the sidewalk. His face was frozen in a familiar fear, the kind that said, "I've seen this before." She spent the night in a holding cell. No one believed her. Not the desk sergeant, not the booking officer. Federal prosecutor? Sure you are. Nice story, lady. They didn't check her credentials. They didn't need to. They had already decided who she was. And that was the moment Olwen knew. I'm not just going to defend myself. I'm going to make them regret ever underestimating me. Olwen didn't go home after she was released on bail that morning. Instead, she drove straight to the U.S. Attorney's office. Her clothes wrinkled, her hair disheveled, her face pale but composed. She walked past security, past the looks of surprise from her colleagues, and into her office without a word. They didn't ask what happened. They knew the look in her eyes. And when Olwen was silent, something or someone was about to fall. 3 weeks later, during the court hearing for her wrongful arrest, she sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. No one in that courtroom, not the judge, not the officers, not even her own public defender, knew who she truly was. That was intentional. She let Darius and Jacob lie. She watched them fabricate their reports, twist their testimonies, and act as if they had already won. Olwen didn't interrupt. She didn't correct them, because the deeper they sank into their lies, the harder they would fall. Her court-appointed lawyer, a fresh-faced kid barely out of law school, stumbled through the arguments, trying his best. He didn't know who Olwen was either, and she didn't tell him, because this case wasn't about legal defense. It was about exposure. At the moment when Judge Allen raised his gavel, ready to dismiss the case, with the same detached smirk he'd used in dozens of others, Olwen rose from her chair. Slow, measured, unshaken. "Before you rule, Your Honor," she said clearly, "I'd like to inform the court that I am a United States attorney." Silence fell like a storm cloud. Darius flinched. Jacob's smirk vanished. Even her lawyer turned to her with wide eyes as if seeing her for the first time. Judge Allen froze, gavel midair. His fingers trembled. His lips parted, but no words came out. Olwen calmly stepped forward, reached into her bag, and pulled out her badge, holding it high as the gold seal caught the courtroom lights. "I'd love to see you dismiss the case now," she said softly. Just then, a new voice echoed through the courtroom. "Your Honor, I have newly obtained evidence relevant to this case." All heads turned. A tall man in a gray suit walked in. Nathan, from Internal Affairs. In his hands, a thick folder and a USB drive. Judge Allen stiffened. "And you are?" "Nathan Cole, Internal Affairs," he replied. "I have body cam footage and surveillance recordings from the night of the arrest." The courtroom buzzed. Darius and Jacob turned pale. They knew what was on those tapes. When the video played, the room watched in disbelief. There was Olwen, walking out of the caf, scrolling her phone, doing absolutely nothing wrong. Then came the officers, their voices clear. "She looks out of place. Work badge? She's either scamming or pretending to be a lawyer. Let's bring her in anyway, she probably has priors." Gasps, murmurs. Even the jury looked shaken. Olwen didn't flinch. She just sat, watching them sink under the weight of their own words. That day, the courtroom didn't just see a victim stand up. They saw the system crack from the inside. And Olwen wasn't done yet. That night, Olwen sat alone at her apartment. She didn't eat. She didn't sleep. She just stared at the files and footage spread across her table. The ones from the courtroom, from Internal Affairs, from the flash drive Daria had handed her the night before she was killed. What started as a personal fight had become something else entirely. This wasn't about her arrest anymore. It was about a system that knew it was broken and fought to stay that way. Neil entered quietly, carrying 2 bags of takeout. He took one look at her and sighed. "Still haven't eaten, huh?" She didn't respond. They lied so easily, she said finally. Like it was nothing. Like they'd done it 100 times before. Neil opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. Nathan just sent this. He played a newly recovered audio file recorded from internal channels. It was Darius and Jacob, laughing, making jokes, and bragging about how the old man's got us covered. Judge Allen will bury this like he always does, one voice said. As long as it doesn't touch one of the boys, we're golden. Olwen sat still, jaw clenched. Allen wasn't just complicit, he was orchestrating it. Neil handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a single slip of paper. No return address, just a handwritten message. Meet me, 10 p.m., abandoned parking lot behind the old bus station. Come alone. Signed, D.C. At first, she thought it was a setup, a trap, but something told her to go anyway. She arrived just before 10. The lot was dim, deserted, the silence thick. A single car waited in the corner. She approached carefully, one hand near the pepper spray in her coat. The passenger window rolled down. Inside was a young woman, her face mostly hidden beneath a hoodie. Her voice trembled. My name is Daria. I'm Judge Allen's daughter. Olwen's breath caught. Daria looked around nervously, then pulled a small USB drive from her pocket. I can't let him keep doing this, she whispered. This has everything, money trails, names, documents. He's not just covering up for cops. He's running the whole operation. Back at the apartment, Olwen, Neil, and Nathan opened the files, and it was all there. Offshore bank accounts tied to Allen, dozens of falsified court transcripts, a hit list of whistleblowers, a network of judges, police captains, and donors protecting each other. The deeper they dug, the darker it got. We have to go public, Olwen said. It's bigger than we thought, Neil replied. If we expose this, they won't just fire back. They'll try to kill you. Olwen looked up, eyes sharp. They already tried. She stared at the name at the top of the list. William Allen, circuit judge. He wasn't just corrupt. He was the root, and it was time someone ripped it out. 2 days after Daria gave Olwen the flash drive, the cost of truth came knocking. That morning was quiet, too quiet. Olwen and Neil were preparing to submit their findings to the federal court. The evidence was airtight. The names, the payments, the manipulation. Judge Allen's entire web was ready to be torn apart. But before they could move, violence struck first. The doorbell rang. Olwen glanced through the peephole. No one. She opened the door a few inches, and Daria collapsed into her arms, blood soaking through her gray hoodie, a bullet hole in her chest. A sniper shot, quick, clean, silent. Time froze. Neil screamed from the hallway. Get back! Another bullet ripped through the doorframe, shattering the wall behind Olwen. She dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she pressed against Daria's wound. But it was already too late. Her body was still, her eyes wide open. She had risked everything to tell the truth, and they silenced her for it. Neil pulled Olwen back inside, locking the door, dragging furniture to block the entrance. They know we have the files. But Olwen didn't speak. She sat on the floor, Daria's blood on her hands, her chest rising and falling in tight, painful gasps. The rage was quiet but all-consuming. They thought they ended something, but what they really did was awaken something far more dangerous. They fled, hiding out in an abandoned warehouse. Nathan met them there, pale and shaken. We've traced the shot. It came from a rooftop across the street, military-grade equipment, professional hit. Olwen stared at the drive. They killed her. For this. Neil looked at her, voice steady. What now? She answered without hesitation. We go public. We burn it all. That night, Olwen received a call. Unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, calm, cold. "You were warned, Miss Williams. Walk away while you still can." She didn't flinch. "If you wanted me gone, you should have killed me when you had the chance." Click. The line went dead. Neil turned to her. "They're scared." Alwyn's jaw tightened. "Good." The next morning she stood outside the courthouse again, not for testimony, not for defense, but for war. Because now it wasn't just about justice, it was about Daria. And Olwen was going to make sure her blood was not spilled in vain. 2 days after Daria's murder, the federal courthouse in District 8 became the center of national attention. Barricades lined the streets. News vans crowded the sidewalks. Cameras pointed toward the marble steps like they were aimed at a battlefield. And walking up those steps was Olwen, flanked by Neil and Nathan, her arms full of the very evidence that could rip a hole in the justice system. Documents, money trails, transcripts, secret recordings. But this time, Olwen wasn't wearing a plain suit. She wore black, crisp, formal. The gold badge of a federal prosecutor pinned proudly to her chest, not to remind them of who she was, but to make sure they never forgot what she stood for. Inside, the court convened for an emergency session. At the defense table sat Judge Allen, surrounded by private security and high-priced lawyers, his once firm posture now hunched, face pale. Olwen didn't look at him. She looked at the presiding judge, a neutral replacement not tied to Allen's circle, and began. "Your Honor, I appear before this court not only as a victim of misconduct, but as a federal prosecutor carrying the burden of voices long silenced by a system that rewards silence over truth." She placed a thick file on the table. Nathan loaded the digital evidence. One by one it unfolded. Secret wire transfers to offshore accounts, transcripts altered by court clerks, a list of whistleblowers marked for surveillance, emails confirming Judge Allen's direct involvement in covering up violent misconduct. The room was stunned. Even seasoned clerks looked shaken. And then came the audio clip, Allen's voice, unmistakable. "If Daria talks, shut her up, and take out Olwen too." The courtroom didn't gasp. It froze. Olwen turned slowly toward Allen. "You once told your colleagues, as long as I'm on the bench, people like her will never win." "Well, Judge, here I am." Allen stood abruptly, shouting, "You think this is justice? You think you're some kind of hero? You have no idea what's at stake." The presiding judge slammed the gavel. "Order!" But Olwen didn't raise her voice. Justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand. After reviewing the evidence, the judge finally spoke. "This court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with federal charges against Judge William Allen. Effective immediately, he will be taken into custody pending trial." Gasps, murmurs. Reporters scrambled. Flashbulbs burst through the gallery. Neil placed a hand on Olwen's shoulder. She didn't smile. She breathed. The kind of breath you take when the weight lifts, just enough to stand taller. As Allen was handcuffed and led away, a reporter called out, "Miss Williams, are you afraid of what happens next?" She turned, stared straight into the camera and said, "They should be." Because for Olwen, this wasn't the end. This was how justice begins. 3 weeks after the historic hearing, Olwen stood alone at the top of the courthouse steps. Autumn wind brushed past her coat, rustling the leaves along the sidewalk. Above her, the federal building loomed, once a monument to unchecked power, now a symbol of truth finally spoken aloud. Judge Allen remained in federal custody, awaiting trial for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, bribery, and orchestrating targeted violence. 14 others had been suspended or indicted. The ripples had spread far and wide. But for Olwen, the real victory wasn't in how many fell. It was in Who Stood Up. She had received hundreds of letters, survivors, former defendants, families who had been silenced for years. One had come from a little girl in Michigan, handwritten in pink crayon, a drawing of Olwen wearing a cape and holding a gavel. "You made me believe that someone like me can still win," it said. Olwen framed it, hanging it on the wall above her desk. Beneath it, she wrote in her own hand, "Justice isn't blind. It's just been looking the other way." She knew the system wasn't clean. Not yet. A courtroom doesn't undo decades of corruption. A verdict doesn't erase injustice. But this was a crack. And through it, light had started to pour in. That night, Neil asked her gently, "Will you finally rest?" Alwyn smiled quietly. "No, I'm going to write. I'm going to speak. I'm going to teach the truth they tried to make us forget." Outside, the world kept turning. Headlines shifted. The noise returned. But something had changed, because now there was a name, a face, a woman who had not backed down. And Alwyn would keep carrying that torch until the light reached every place the darkness thought it could hide. Alwyn's story isn't just about one woman demanding justice after being wrongfully arrested. It's a powerful reminder that in a system designed to silence dissent, it only takes one person brave enough to stand up to change everything. Justice doesn't appear on its own. It has to be claimed with courage, with intellect, and sometimes with painful sacrifice. But more important than any law or title is this truth: we must never stay silent, even when silence feels safer. Alwyn's actions gave voice to thousands of others, those who had been overlooked, dismissed, or punished simply for existing in the wrong place, with the wrong skin color, at the wrong time. Every step she took sent a message. I don't fight because I am a victim. I fight because I know I can make a difference. Because in the end, truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs someone brave enough to speak it,